Good evening and welcome to Alan's Italy. I am back after 4 weeks, which is really the longest that I've ever been away from the studio. I am now back and armed with a lot of new shows. The recent trip that Laura and I took to Italy had three major parts to it. You know, one was our usual trip to Tuscany and Florence, and then of course Laura's appearance in the Venice Biennale, and my obtaining press credentials permitted me to do a lot of things that I would normally have not been able to do. So let's first go to my album. Tonight's show is going to be a show related to the roads and streets of Italy. It's a show I put together a number of months ago, and I really go through all the pictures of Italy that we had, and I talk about some of my favorite streets and roads. And as I put this show together, I realized that it would be a really good idea to not only show my favorite streets, but also to go back through history and talk a little bit about how the concept of roads developed in Italy, where they began, and some of the interesting facts before I actually went into the current situation in terms of roads and streets. And those of you who've been watching the show know that I have this abiding interest in travel. And I'm not just talking about traveling around Europe and traveling around Italy, but just in general, I'm just the kind of person who likes to travel on buses and trains and planes and so on. It doesn't matter where I'm going. I just kind of enjoy that whole concept, having been traveling around the country with my parents. And my father always let me sit in the front seat, even though my mother really was supposed to be sitting in the passenger seat of the front of the car. My father told me to sit in the front because he wanted me to do the navigating. So I always had, I developed this really great interest for traveling and maps and so on. So this is what's translated, I suppose, into my love of all this stuff. But the first thing is really kind of a publicity thing for me. I was asked by the Woodstock Artists Association to try to publicize their benefit splash, which takes place on Saturday, June 22nd, which is a week from tomorrow, between 5:30 and 8. And, each artist have contributed their work in a show called Little Gems, and people can come and bid on the artwork, and they also have other things that they're going to be auctioning off, not least of which is my favorite, which I probably won't be doing because I can't really afford it, but it's a concert that Happy Tram will perform in your home for a large, a number of people, but not more than 25. And that would have been really something I'd be interested in, but I don't think I could afford that. Anyway, so they're auctioning off some very interesting things, and you should go over and take a look at that. So the Benefit Splash, it's a yearly event, and it'll take place at the Woodstock Artists Association. For more information, go to the website, which you could see right there, www.woodstockart.org. Okay, so the trip that we just took. And I would say that the main part of this trip was centered around my videographer and photographer of the wonderful photos and videos that you've seen on this show, Laura Gerton. And she was in the Venice Biennale and at an exhibition known as Personal Structures, which took place in that palazzo. It's called the Palazzo Bembo. And they had a 4-day opening that was absolutely incredible, the 28th, 29th, 30th, and 31st of May. The opening took place every evening from 6 to 10 and included some really amazing artists, as you could see listed there. It's hard to read because it's so small, but the artists were just amazing, and the party that they threw was quite amazing as well. In the courtyard were little snacks and Prosecco and some wine and a live band playing each evening from 6 to 10. So it was quite a thing and very exciting, and that's exactly the way it looks, the way you see it in that picture. And the exhibition actually took place on the this floor. Let me show it with the pointer. This floor and the one above it, and you were able to come out on the balcony here and see the Grand Canal. I have a lot of shows that I'm going to be doing on that over the course of the next several months, and I'll talk about that a little more in the future. But this particular trip that we took had three major parts to it. The first part, of course, was our usual trip to Tuscany. The second part was Laura's opening at the Palazzo Bembo. And the third part had to do with me obtaining press credentials. And this is what the actual little badge, I was going to bring the badge, but I forgot to bring it. But this is, I was wearing this, all through the opening of the Biennale. And I was able to basically walk up to people and ask them if they would like to be interviewed for a television show. And I have about 20 interviews that I did, which I'll be showing over the course of the next several months. And they're really amazing, with artists from all over the world simply standing in front of their work, talking about it, with me asking a few questions. But it's really amazing. And even if you're not a great lover of art, you would really enjoy this, because it gives you a chance to meet people from all over the world, from China, from Korea, from India, from Africa, from different parts of Europe, South America, and also from the United States. Really fascinating, and I hope that you enjoy that. That'll actually be starting a little down the road from that. But the Biennale consists of really three parts. One of them is the actual Biennale at two places called Arsenale and Giardini. And then there are collateral exhibitions. That's what Laura was in. And there are dozens of them, and Laura was in the biggest and I think the best at the Palazzo Bembo. But we'll be talking about that in future weeks. But these are some of the shows that I have organized that you will be seeing in the next year or so. And these are the shows that I've come up with from the Florence part of the trip, Florence and Orvieto. And I have interviews with shopkeepers in Orvieto that my friend Franco Sala worked out for me. So he escorted us on this really wonderful tour of some of the shops in Orvieto. And the sculpture in the Piazza della Signorina is something I really worked on in Florence. And then Italy Then and Now, my friend Luca took me to a great bookstore that had some of the great photographs by the Alinari brothers, and I'm going to translate that into a series of shows. And then, of course, we visited the Jewish community of Florence and had interviews with the director, the president, and architect of the association. And that's going to be really fascinating, with some really wonderful interviews. And then I have some interviews in one of my favorite restaurants in Florence, the Ristorante La Grotto di Leo. No cooking demonstration, but I do have an interview with the pizza chef who's been there for about 20 years, who explained some of his craft. And then a show on shopping in Florence, and a really great show on two of the newly elected representatives of the Five Star Movement, which is their Occupy Wall Street equivalent. So that'll be very interesting. And of course, we then visited towns in Tuscany. So we visited mainly the towns of Pistoia and Colle di Valdelsa. And we have some really great footage on that. So that'll be very nice. And then the Venice shows that I have, I'm going to be talking about the Venice Biennale, and I'm going to start out really with 4 shows on the exhibition at the Palazzo Bembo. And the reason I'm doing 4 shows, which is probably the most I've ever done on a particular theme, is that I have these 20 interviews with artists, and I have a gallery talk by one of the most famous artists at the Palazzo Bembo, a fellow named Sam Jinks, who's a sculptor from Australia. And I have an interview with the president of the association that put this on, the Global Arts Affairs Foundation. So that'll be very good. And then of course we'll talk about the Venice Biennale itself at Arsenale and Giardini. And then of course we took a lot of photos of Venice scenes, and I have videos of a boat ride down the Grand Canal. And we took a lot of pictures of everyday life in Venice, parents just playing with their children and visiting with each other. And I have a lot of footage on the neighborhoods of Venice. There are different, districts that are each known for different aspects of life in Venice. And then we did a series of photographs on Venice in the evening. And Venice in the evening is just an amazing experience, and I have a show on that. And of course, we did an interview with the chief rabbi, the vice president, and a volunteer of the community, the Jewish community of Venice, which was a fascinating series of interviews that I'll also be showing on the show coming up soon. While we were in Venice, we stayed in 3 hotels. That's a story in itself. We don't usually stay in 3 different hotels when we're visiting one city, but this one turned out to be that way. And each of them turned out to be an amazing experience. So I'm doing a show just on the 3 hotels. And in the next 2 months, these are the shows that I'm going to be doing. The Tonight Show, which is Streets and Roads in Italy. And then next week is going to be Palazzi of Florence. That'll give me a couple of weeks to then prepare for the newer shows. And I'm going to begin on June 28th with the Jewish Experience in Italy, Part 1, which is going to be the Florence part, Part 2, which will be the Venice part, on July 5th. And then for the rest of July, I'm going to focus on the interviews that I did with the artists from all over the world at the Palazzo Bembo. So I'm putting all that together right now, really working on 6 shows at the same time, trying to get all of that organized. I promised all of these people I would put them on as soon as possible, and I have to kind of fulfill that promise because the Venice Biennale is going on at the current time, and I guess they would like me to help publicize the exhibition, so I'd be happy to do that, of course. So that's what's coming up in the near future. But tonight, back to Italian streets and roads. So this is show number 66. And then the first thing I did was I went around the world, and those of you who have familiarity with New York City know that this is indeed Fifth Avenue, looking north towards the Empire State Building, obviously south of 34th Street. So Fifth Avenue, one of the most famous streets in the world. I'll give you a couple of seconds to see if you could figure this one out. This is the Champs-Élysées, which is, of course, the most famous street in Paris. And that's, a really beautiful street. I've been privileged to be in Paris for four times in my life, and this is an amazing street. This is, of course, Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C., which leads to the Capitol in Washington. And this one is a street called Las Ramblas, which is a really jumping street in Barcelona. And I remember when Laura and I visited Barcelona about 10 years ago, this was where everybody kind of came at night to hang out. And you could see that it's very, very crowded, and there's a lot going on. Street merchants and musicians and restaurants, and this is where everybody goes at night in Barcelona. But I thought I would start out by talking about the ancient Roman roads. And I did a lot of research, and I did this research actually a couple of months ago, so I haven't yet committed it to memory, so I'm going to read some of this, unfortunately. But these are the main roads in ancient Rome. And, if you look at this, you have to really look at this closely, and you could do that while I do a little bit of reading about some of the history. But roads in general in ancient times began in Iraq, when Iraq was called Ur, U-R, 6,000 years ago. And in the Roman Empire, when roads became really very, very prevalent, they were used for expansion and for consolidation of the empire by using them for the movement on land of armies, officials, and civilians. Most of the roads in ancient Rome were built by the armies. During the times when they weren't fighting battles, the soldiers would be put to good use by having them help build the roads. And there were local roads or, that just basically connected cities and towns, and roads that, streets in the actual cities. And then there were long distance highways. Those are the ones you're actually looking at now, some of the much longer roads. They were stone paved, and they were cambered, which meant that they were built on an arch so that they were good for drainage, so the roads did not accumulate much water. There were 29 great military highways that occupied the 113 provinces, and this is what Europe looked like during the Roman times, and all the networks of roads that took place. 113 provinces. There were 372 road links, and there were a total of 240,000 miles of roads that you're looking at now. If you look at all those roads and how far they extended, all of them put together come to 240,000 miles, of which 48,000 were paved. In Gaul alone, Gaul was, of course, the ancient name for France. There were 16,000 miles of roads. Imagine that. And you could see that's right in this area. This is where France now is, and that's where most of the roads were. But also in Great Britain, there were 2,400 miles of road. The word mile is a Latin word which derives from the word milia passum, which basically means 1,000 paces. And the original Roman mile was 4,000, what we now have the equivalent to 4,841 feet. But now, of course, a mile is 5,280 feet. This is something that every student in school kind of memorized, at least I did as a former mathematician. And they had markers every mile or so to indicate where you are in relation to Rome and in relation to other cities around Italy at the time. Each marker was 5 feet high and weighed 2 tons. At the base was inscribed the number of miles relative to the starting point of that particular road. And in a panel at eye level was indicated the distance to the Roman Forum. So literally, in those days, all roads leaded to Rome. And I have a few examples. This is what one of the markers looked like. And at the very base is indicated the amount of miles from the starting point of that road. But the panel that they were talking about at eye level, there you see it right there in the form of an oval, oval on the top and then squared off on the bottom, is the distance to the Roman Forum. Imagine that. So everything was kind of indicated as measured from the Roman Forum, which was considered the center of the known world at that time. This is not a Roman street. It's actually a street in the necropolis. Those of you who toured with me on the show indicated about Orvieto recognize this as being the necropolis in Orvieto, the Etruscan necropolis from 2,500 years ago. And this was, I guess, the oldest street that I could possibly find on the internet, which we actually had a picture of, so I thought it was appropriate that we start with this street, even though it wasn't, a street that was really used for commerce. It was used in the burial site for the Etruscans at that time. This is the picture I've shown several times. This is what ancient Rome looked like 2,000 years ago. To be specific, this is what the Roman Forum looked like 2,000 years ago, and you could see that it's, of course, quite beautiful. This is one of my favorite photos that I've ever taken, not photos, but drawings that I've ever taken off the internet. And these were what some of the roads look like. The road that you see right there, you see this arch right at the, kind of right part of the screen. That's the Arch of Septimius Severus, and that street that goes right from the arch, where you see the horses there, is called the Via Sacra, which was one of the main roads in the Roman Forum at that time. Most of the activity in the Roman Forum took place on that center area there, and that column you see in the middle is the column of focus, and this little platform here was called the rostrum, and that's where all the speeches took place. They'd get up on here, and the people would gather here, and they'd make all the speeches. So that's what streets, looked like in ancient Rome 2,000 years ago. This is a street in the Roman port city of Ostia Antica, which is, you could still visit. This is a picture we took several years ago when we visited this. About a mile, I would say an hour west of the city of Rome. You get on a train, you make a switch to another train, you come to this really wonderful spot, and you can see the street over there, the cobblestone street on the right side. This is what the Via Appia Antica looked like, and those buildings you see on either side were tombs. They weren't allowed to do any burial inside the city of Rome, so people were buried along this road. And this is what it looks like today, of course, and most of the memorials and monuments have been torn down, and that's really all you have left. There are a few larger monuments along the way, but this is what the Via Appia looks like today. This is a street in Pompeii, and you could see, about midway in that picture, along that road, you see these two little bumps. See these two little bumps right here? This is what we're looking at. And I mentioned this once before on the show, that these were actually put in the middle of the road to help people walk across the street when the streets were not very well removed of water that had fallen during rainstorms. So they had actual stepping stones that were placed there at a particular distance that permitted ox carts and so on to be able to go down the road as well. So that's what the Romans did to help people cross the street. Otherwise, it would have been quite a messy ordeal. This is one of my favorite ancient Roman streets. It's in Pompeii, and I love it because you're coming down this street and it branches off in two directions, which reminds me now very much of a street that appears in Florence. And this is a Florentine street in the same kind of construction as that Roman street. It comes to a point, and then the road branches off into two parts. So this is one of my favorite streets in Florence, and it's a street that's off the Via Tornabuoni, in very, very close proximity to the Palazzo Strozzi. We'll actually be talking about the Palazzi of Florence next week, so I'll talk a little more about the Palazzi Strozzi. But this is one of my favorite streets, patterned after this street to a large extent. And then, of course, this is also one of my favorite streets. As you go further down that street I just showed you, you come to this spot, which is not only, one street that branches into two, but one street that branches into three streets. And I love these streets. And each of those streets takes you to a different place depending upon where in Florence you might be going. And you could see the street cluttered with Vespas and pedestrians, and all of those streets, as you could see, are one way. That's that red sign with the horizontal white line going through it. That means that it's a one-way street, so the traffic is coming in the direction we're looking from that direction, going into this main street. This is another street in Pompeii. So this is what a typical street looks like in Pompeii, with the structures on either side. This happened to have been a commerce street, so those were stores on the left and the right, as opposed to dwellings. And this is a very famous street. This is the Via Claudia, which is not in the city of Rome, but is actually in the town of Tuscania. And Rick took us here when we went to Tuscania in 2012. And it's, as you can see, it's kind of kept very well so that people can, walk on it. And that was a road that extended in both directions, many, many hundreds of miles. This is a street in the excavational site of Paestum. You may remember we did a show on this with Frank Palaia many months ago, and that you see on the right side there is the ancient Roman road or street that passes by one of the Greek temples. Then, of course, I have an interest in 19th century photography. As many of you know, I did a few shows related to the Alinari brothers, who pioneered photography in the 19th century. and lived in Florence. And this is a 19th century street in Florence, right along the Arno River. And that's what that looked like sometime in the 19th century. This is an even earlier photograph. It's still the 19th century, but it's during the 1860s. And this is actually the Jewish ghetto, which at the time was known as the Mercato Vecchio, which is now known as the Piazza Repubblica, after they cleaned up that whole area. But that's what a street looked like. That, of course, was not a paved street, as you could see, but was nonetheless one of the streets that ran through the ghetto in the 19th century. This is another 19th century photo of the street that runs right past. Actually, this is a great street because it runs right between the Cathedral of Florence on the right side and the Baptistry of Florence on the left side. And this is another street this is actually the Piazza San Firenze in Florence, and it leads to what is now known as the Via Proconsolo. And this is one of my favorite streets because I love the view from this point. You can see the Bargello over there on the right, and the church known as the Badia Fiorentina, which is with the high steeple right there in the center. And of course, you get a very nice view of the dome of the cathedral over there on the left side. You see the cars. In this sense, in this particular one, it's probably not a 19th century photograph because we do see motorized vehicles in there. So this is probably early 20th century. And that's what that street looked like at that time, early 20th century, and of course, in the year 2012. Hasn't changed very much, except that you no longer have trams running down that street because there are no longer the electrification of the wires above it. And also, of course, it's been updated and there's this divider right down the center. Okay, so we start our tour of my favorite streets in Italy with some of the big city streets. And we start out with Florence, and we start out indeed with my favorite street in Florence, the Via della Scala, where my favorite hotel is, and my second favorite restaurant, and one of my favorite gelatos, and Lydia's shop, Gioia Chiara. So that's a favorite of mine, even though I've told you many times it's not one of the prettiest streets, as you could see. This is a street in Rome known as the Via Quattro Fontane, which gets its name from Quattro Fontane, which means the four fountains. That's one of them over there in the corner. And this street eventually leads to the Spanish Steps. This is a street called the Via Modena, which is the location of a hotel we stay in. So I like that street very much. This is another street called the Via Tritone, which leads to the center of the city. This is a street that runs along the Tiber River, and this is a very pretty street because you get to actually walk along the side of the river there. This is the Via dei Fori Imperiale. That's a picture of Laura and me standing in the middle with the Colosseum behind us. This is now a pedestrian street, so you get to kind of walk freely here. But in the early 1900s, this street was built by Mussolini, primarily as a way for him to ride majestically in his open-aired vehicle from the Colosseum to the Palazzo Venezia, where he made his famous speeches. So it was his attempt to kind of connect the glory of ancient Rome with his own glory of the fascists in the 1920s. That's why he built that street. There's another street in Rome, but a much, very, very pretty street with obviously cafes along the side. This is Rome at night, and every city in Italy at night is just magical. And this is one of the back streets of Rome at, in the evening. And you get this eerie feeling, although it's very safe, it's still a very eerie feeling. There's another view of another street in Rome. And there's the street that I've showed a couple of times, which leads to the Piazza della Rotondo, and the most famous monumental temple in Rome, the Pantheon. Another street in Rome at night, but a larger street. This is actually back to Florence, and this is one of the streets that is used as a parking lot for Vespas. There's another street in Florence called the Via Tornabuoni, with the Palazzo Strozzi over there on the corner. This is another street in Florence, which is called this is actually the other end of the Via Tornabuoni. This is as you go further north. If you go further south, you get to this point, which is where the Piazza Santa Trinita is located, and that's the famous church of Santa Trinita over there on the right side, leading to the bridge that you could see very faintly in the distance, the Ponte Santa Trinita. This is, of course, the street that goes over the Ponte Vecchio, one of the oldest bridges in Italy and one of the most beautiful. This is another street in Florence. This is actually, I think, the Via Tornabuoni again, between the two spots, because you can see the monument over here in the distance. This is what I just showed you. And then if you come down this street going north, you come eventually to the Palazzo Strozzi. This is the street that runs alongside the Arno River in Florence. And this is the street that runs along the Arno River in Pisa, about 100 or so miles to the west of Florence. So any street that runs along the side of the Arno is called a Lungarno. And they have the word Arno in that as well. This is a street, Pisa. It's a Sunday, so there's not much going on there on this particular street, but you can imagine it's pretty jumping during the week. Another street in Pisa that runs along the Arno with that very pretty church over there in the center of the picture, and the Science Museum over there on the right side in that blue building. This is a street in Milan, and Milan has very broad thoroughfares, but this is a really pretty street in the back streets of Milan. The hotel we stay in, the Hotel Star, when we're in Milan, we stay right in this area, and there's a really wonderful Asian restaurant right around the corner from here. Believe it or not, when we're in Milan, we have Asian food instead of Italian food. This is another street in Milan. This is a picture that Laura took. This is a fashion shoot that is taking place on one of the streets in Milan, and you can see the photographers there set up to do a fashion shoot. As many of you know, Milan is one of the fashion capitals of Europe. And this is my favorite street in Milan. This is the Via Dante. It is pedestrian only. It begins at the near where the cathedral is, and it goes all the way up over there in the back to the Castello Sforzesco, which is the location of one of my favorite sculptures, the Rondanini Pietà by Michelangelo. But it's a great street because it's got cafes and stores, and you're unencumbered by the thought that you might be mowed down by a car by simply walking along there and having a very nice afternoon. There's a typical street in Venice. Of course, the streets in Venice have two forms. One of them are the canals, and the other are the streets that run alongside the canals. And there you can see a canal. This is actually the Rio San Trovaso, and there's the street that runs alongside of it. Another canal in Venice. I have a lot more photos of Venice to show you over the next several months. And this is a bridge in Murano, and that's the street that runs alongside of it. This is one of the back streets of Venice. The back streets in Venice are, of course, one of my favorite things to do is just get lost in the back streets. Another back street, and yet another one leading heaven knows where. This is actually a back street in the town of Burano. Burano, as you know, is known for its colorful houses. This is an amazing picture. Laura took this in Perugia, which is located in Umbria, and you could see all the streets there, very interesting streets. One which has steps, one which kind of just has an incline, and then a regular street over there to the right of that with the rest of the city in the background. This is a magnificent picture. One of our favorites in Umbria. This is the town of Lucca. This is in Venice, and what you're looking at is a street that actually runs underneath a building. And when you have that type of situation, it's called, as you could see there written right on top of that archway, a sottoportego. A sottoportego is a kind of a passageway from one side of a building to another, going through an arch with the street connecting one side to the other. I love sottoportegos. And I took this one off the internet, and you could see the sottoportego there with the two people walking through it, and the name of it with graffiti all over it. Venice being, of course, a modern city. Okay, small town streets. So these are mostly in Tuscany, but not all of them. Some of them are in Tuscany, some of them are in Cinque Terre, some of them are in the Lake Como area. This particular one is in the Lake Maggiore area, which is the main street in the town of Stresa, which obviously is a beautiful street because it runs right alongside Lake Maggiore. And this is a street in the, this is not actually a small town, this is Verona. So you can see that's a really pretty street with arches all along the way. This is a street in the town of Sorrento on the Amalfi Coast. And this is a very interesting street. You could see that, you just go all the way around it. That's the way streets are in Italy. They kind of wind around and around until you get to your destination. This is another street located in Sorrento, and you could see that it's kind of, there are kind of steps along the way. A beautiful street, though. And this is actually a street. This is not, steps leading to somebody's house. This is an actual street leading from one part of the town to another. That's me posing on a street in Canazai, which is located in the Dolomites. Canazai is at the very foot of one of the mountains. Not at the foot, I would say, because you're still quite a few thousand feet up. But that's one of the streets. This is again a street in the Amalfi Coast area. Whoop, the air conditioning flipped on. So let's try to drown that out. This is the town of Giulio Sangallo. This is a street in the town of Panzano, which is located in the Chianti region of Tuscany. And this is another street, I believe this is Castellina, which is another town in the Chianti region. This is one of my favorite streets. This is in Todi, which is located in Umbria. And it's a very pretty street, as you can see. A little hard to navigate, though, if you're not used to it. But they give you that center area, which is kind of, makes it a little easier for you to walk on. This is another street in the town of Todi. And you can see that walking along this street is absolutely stunning because you get the incredible views of the Umbrian countryside all around it. This is a street in, I believe, Castellina, but I'm not totally sure. Either Castellina or San Salvatore in Abbadia San Salvatore in central Tuscany. This is definitely the town of Gaiole. We came to Gaiole, which is located in Chianti, on a rainy day, and this is the picture we took on a really dreary afternoon. And this is a street in the town of Varenna on Lake Como. Varenna has the most charming streets, taken in toto when you could look at all the streets on Lake Como. This is Cinque Terre, the town of Rio Maggiore, the street that runs from the train station down to the dock. And this is the end of that street, right there by the waterside with the boats and the water off there in the distance. That's the Mediterranean Sea. that you're looking at in the distance. This is a street in Varenna on Lake Como. And it's a beautiful street, as you could see. It's, goes through an arch. In Venice, that might be called a sotto portego, although sotto portegos generally go right through a building with buildings on both sides. So even the one on the left is not a sotto portego, and the one on the right doesn't have a building on the left, so it's not really would be categorized as such. This is another street in the town of Varenna, and it's all up and down because to get from the main street down to the dock, these are the streets you have to now try to navigate. Let me see. I think this is the town of Manarola in Cinque Terre. Either Manarola or Rio Maggiore, but I would lean towards Manarola at this point. This is a street in the town of La Spezia. When you visit Cinque Terre, one of the places you could stay is in La Spezia, which is just to the south of Cinque Terre, where we stayed, and we loved this town. It was very lively at night. This was the middle of the winter, and Cinque Terre kind of, the towns in Cinque Terre kind of empty out, but this was a street in La Spezia that was really jumping. You could see that it's got the bright lights from the Christmas season, so we were very pleased about staying on that street. This is the street in Bonareggio, which will eventually lead to the town of Civita di Bonareggio, and that bell tower on the right I've spoken about before was the bell tower that was ringing its chimes all night, keeping Laura and I up the entire night. This is a road that runs through the western Dolomites, leading through the what's called the Tonali Pass, with all the condominiums over there on the right side. This is back to Varenna. I guess these are organized in a rather peculiar fashion, but I just wanted to keep it varied. And this is again the street that leads from the main street down to the dock. Another street in Varenna, which basically has the same effect. This is a street in Civita di Bonareggio, which is one of my favorite hill towns. A beautiful street, as you could see. Another town in Civita, another rather street in Civita. Yet another one. This is really beautiful with the arches and the steps going up to somebody's house over there on the left. Another street in Civita. And this is the street in the town of Pitigliano, which is one of the southernmost towns in all of Tuscany. This is also in Pitigliano, and those people over there are my friend David and Rick and Sharon and I walking down the street. This is the view from Pitigliano. That's a road that leads down into the valley, right from the main part of the city. This is one of the side streets in Pitigliano. This is kind of in the ghetto area, if I remember correctly. This is a street in one of my favorite Tuscan towns, the town of Bagno Vignoni. You can see what a beautiful, beautiful town this is. I've showed this on the show many times. And that's another view. Actually, it's the same, standing in this spot and looking in the opposite direction. This is what you see. So that's a really beautiful street. And this is a street in my friend Luca's town of Felinia Valdarno. It's a residential street, as you could see, with apartments on the left and the right. This is in the town of Panzano, where Luca actually lived at one time, a beautiful street. This is the street in Poppi, which is in eastern Tuscany, with that beautiful church in the center, and the loggias over there on the left and the right.
Sorry, wrong spot. I was looking for a rehearsal for Birds Unaware.
Well, there's a live show going on now, so please excuse us. There's a street also in that same area. And there's an archway over there. And this is again in Burano. This is a really interesting street in Burano. going down to the dock in Varenna again in Varenna. I'm moving a little faster now because I do have a video at the very end to show you. And this is also on Lake Como, again in the town of Varenna. Actually, I think this could be in Bellagio, going down to the dock, also in Bellagio. You see these amazing streets. These are all on Lake Como. This is Orvieto, I believe. This is a street in Orvieto with the beautiful arches. Also Orvieto, I believe. This is actually the street where I took all the interviews. You know, my friend Franco Sala took me on a tour of streets, a street that had all these shops, and he took me, and I think this was the street, into and out of every single store, and I got interviews with all the shopkeepers, so that'll be very interesting for a future show. Another street in Orvieto, yet another one. Orvieto is my favorite town in Umbria. This is the street leading, this is the ancient Roman road off there on, you know, as it's going up the mountain, that is now paved and is used as a modern road. This is Tuscania. This is Loro Cefena, and that road, that little street there led to the mill. And in the mill, of course, Luca and I interviewed the mill keeper who had been there for like 50 years. He's 86 years old, ready to retire. That's a scene from the interview we were doing of him back in 2012. This is Bagno Vignoni, not Bagno Vignoni, Borgo Boro. Got to keep these towns straight in your mind, I'll tell you. This is also Il Boro, one of the really beautiful towns of eastern Tuscany. This is Viterbo. No, this is Montefiascone. This is Viterbo. I'm trying to move a little faster now. This is all in Viterbo. Country roads, I did a little thing on country roads here. That's one of my favorite spots, and that's where like you get all these signs going every which way. Another example of a road with all the signs. The Amalfi Coast Road with the incredible view. You got to ride along this in a car or a bus to get the most spectacular views, some of the most spectacular views in all of Italy. There's another view of that going along the Amalfi Coast. And of course, this is the problem with this road. Even though it's beautiful, you get traffic jams. And the traffic jams are caused mostly by the fact that a large truck and a large bus cannot pass each other. So you have to have one of them backing up, and that holds traffic up. So that's one of the most famous roads in all of Italy along the Amalfi Coast. This is through the Alpi Apuane in eastern Tuscany, northeastern Tuscany. And remember that story of us getting stuck in the snow and turning back. That's what it looked like. This is a road through central Tuscany. A beautiful view. So I got to move now because I want to show the video. This is where the sheep accosted us on the road. That was a pretty amazing road around Lake Bolsena. This is a road leading to Orvieto. A Tuscan road. Another Tuscan road. A beautiful road leading up to the town of Cortona. A road leading through central Tuscany. Again, central Tuscany. You can tell by the trees that it's central Tuscany. And that brings us to really the end of the show. And my next show will be the Palazzi of Florence. I will talk about some of the most famous. But I'd like to first, before I end the show you this video. And this was taken from our recent trip in Venice. And it's a really amazing little video. It only runs a little less than 2 minutes. So we'll do this, and then we'll do the closing for the show. So let's do this one. We'll need sound on this because And literally, on that note, I will say to you that it was a pleasure bringing you tonight's show. Buonanotte e buona fortuna.